Let's talk about the fascinating, and sometimes tricky, relationship between our brain's capacity and our ability to truly focus. We're going to dive into why sometimes a little bit of pressure is exactly what you need to get things done. So, how does this actually work?
Okay, so here's the fundamental problem, right? Our brain has a finite amount of processing power. When you're juggling deadlines, tasks, and a constant stream of notifications, it's so easy to feel completely overwhelmed, as if there just isn't enough mental bandwidth to go around.
And yet, have you ever noticed that strange paradox? A critical deadline is looming, and all of a sudden your focus becomes razor sharp. How can that feeling of pressure, which should be draining our capacity, actually improve our concentration? Well, that's exactly the question we're going to answer.
To get to the bottom of this, we first need to be really clear on what we're talking about when we say mental capacity. So think of your capacity as the total pool of resources your brain has for everything. It's the fuel for your attention, your working memory, and your decision-making. Now, the amount of capacity we have isn't fixed. It changes depending on the state of our nervous system. But crucially, it is always a limited resource.
Now, as I mentioned, the amount of capacity we have available depends on our nervous system state. A really useful way to understand this is through the traffic light processing framework. So let's kick things off with what's known as the green state.
When you're in the green state, your mental capacity is at its absolute widest. You can imagine your attention is like a camera with a wide-angle lens, taking in the entire scene. Your brain is open, it's flexible, and you've got plenty of resources to play with.
And this wide-open state has some pretty clear advantages. You can process multiple streams of information at once, it's fantastic for creative thinking, and you can switch between different tasks with relative ease. Your attention can just move around freely, which is perfect for things like brainstorming, or when you need to weigh up lots of different options.
But what about that deep, sustained concentration on a single task? Well, that requires something else entirely. It requires a shift, a narrowing of that wide-angle lens. And this is where we start to move towards the orange state.
You see, focus is a much more deliberate act. It's not just about paying attention. It's about sustaining that attention on one specific thing while actively fighting off all the other distractions. It's a real high-level function, one that's managed by the brain's executive control system.
So as our nervous system starts to shift towards that orange state, our processing capacity naturally begins to narrow down. What's happening is the brain starts to filter things out. It reduces the number of things it's trying to deal with all at once, and it starts prioritizing what it thinks is most important.
And the difference here is really clear. In the green state, you're processing lots of things. But as you shift towards orange, you start to prioritize the most critical data. You go from being open to all sorts of possibilities to becoming much more selective. Your attention literally changes from being broad and flexible to being directed and sustained.
And this brings us to the central idea of this whole explainer. The most productive zone for that deep, powerful focus, it isn't actually in the wide-open green state. It's in the transition, that space between green and orange.
So here's the crucial point. That slight narrowing of your mental capacity isn't a bug, it's a feature. It actually improves your ability to focus precisely because your brain is dealing with fewer competing signals. And that is why a looming deadline can sometimes be so helpful.
This zone is the absolute sweet spot. You've got just enough nervous system activation to really lock onto your task, but you still have enough capacity left over to be flexible and think clearly. It's like your attentional lens is perfectly zoomed in, sharp on the subject, but not so tight that you lose all sense of perspective.
The benefits of being in this zone are really clear. With fewer distractions to process, more of your brain's precious resources can be channeled directly into the task at hand. Your whole system just becomes more selective, more efficient, which, of course, can lead to a huge boost in productivity and help you get things done. And here's the really powerful part. This isn't just something that happens to you. It's not a passive process. We can actually learn to consciously control this attentional lens ourselves.
That's right. You can consciously and intentionally narrow your own capacity to get into that state of useful, sustained focus. It's a skill. And like any skill, it's one you can develop.
So how do you do it? Well, here's a simple three-step way to think about it. First, you just recognize when a task actually needs that deep, sustained focus. Second, you activate the system. You can do this by introducing a clear goal or maybe a manageable bit of urgency, something as simple as setting a timer. And finally, you engage. Now that your attention is narrowed, you can direct it fully onto that specific task.
So the big takeaway here is that true focus isn't about being in that wide-open green state. It's about finding just the right level of activation. And that leaves us with a final question for you to think about. Knowing what you know now, how will you consciously adjust your own attentional lens to meet whatever challenge is coming up next?